This is potentially the largest rattlesnake den in North America.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting.
And it's potentially one of the largest snake dens in Alberta because there's also 3 other species of snakes in that den.
Sharing the same den?
Yes.
So the prairie rattlesnake, and then is it some non-venomous like garter snakes in there as well?
Garter snakes. What else is there? Some racers. I can't remember the name of all the species that we have in Alberta. It's not very many. We have 7 species of snakes in Alberta. So
yeah,
but that's super cool that we have all these snakes in this one den down in the prairies here in Alberta.
That is very cool. So he's going to take that 1,200 tags and monitor them over the next 3 years and see kind of how they fare, where they're dying, where we're losing them and whatnot?
Yeah, because they're a threatened species. So it's important for him and the government and this other organization to monitor them and see how their population is doing, because they're currently threatened. So that's very close to being endangered. So we don't want that, especially for the only species of rattlesnake that we have in the province.
Right. Have you ever seen one in the wild? I've never seen one.
I have not seen the prairie rattlesnake in the wild yet. I've seen lots of pictures. Yeah. Lots of really cool pictures that I can send you for the episode 2 from Adam.
Sure, that'd be awesome.
There's like one picture where it's like 20 rattlesnakes in just this one den. It is wild. It looks so cool.
Welcome back to the Animals at Home podcast. My name is Dylan Perrin, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Today, I'm speaking with Brandon Millichamp, who is the co-host of the Canadian Herpetoculture podcast, and he's also the current president of TERRAS, which is the Alberta Reptile and Amphibian Society. For those of you who aren't familiar with what Alberta is, that is one of the provinces in Canada. Now, in the episode, we discuss how Brandon got into reptile keeping, as well as a few of the really interesting species that he's currently working with. He has a few breeding projects going with Leioheterodon. I hope I'm saying that genus right. That is the Madagascar giant hognose snakes. He keeps all 3 species in the Leioheterodon genus. So we discussed that, the differences between them, and sort of how his breeding projects are going along or coming along. But also, I think this conversation has a much deeper purpose, and it's very important for the overall health of our hobby and herpetoculture in general. And that is, we discuss herp societies. And I think this is a very underutilized aspect of our hobby, and especially now, I think they were bigger in the past, and then the internet, Facebook forums came along, and I think a lot of those herp societies dissolved. And Brandon talks about the importance of a healthy herp society and how they can function within our communities and within our society to make sure that our hobby is protected and that we're doing the responsible and the right things as animal owners. We do keep exotic animals, so part of that is we do have to bear the responsibility of doing this right. So Brandon talks about some incredible ideas and some incredible things he's done with his society that go a long way to showing the community that we are responsible. And one of the things we talk about is emergency action plans. That's not something that we've talked about a lot. I don't think we've ever mentioned on the podcast. So Brandon talks about how he's putting those plans together. He talks about how he's had involvement with the government and different municipalities as far as rules and regulations and bylaws go, and how he incorporates the society into education and whatnot with younger kids. And it's just a fascinating conversation, and I hope what it does is either promote people to start their own herp societies if there aren't any in your area, or to reinvigorate the ones that are just sort of hanging on by a thread. There's so much great work that can be done here, and I think this is a great foundational episode to give people some good ideas and good base ideas of what they can do with a herp society in their community. And as always, if you're looking for more information on this episode, make sure you head to animalsathomenetwork.com. There you'll find the show notes for every episode that has been recorded. And you may start realizing that I'm starting to fall back onto a regular schedule as far as posting and publishing podcasts go. I'm not back to the every 7 days like I was before the baby was born, but we should be back at every 10 days, I think. And for those of you that have been sticking around for the last few episodes, you do know that I have recently outsourced my editing, so that's now being done by someone else, which is a huge weight off my plate. Of course, it's also a new expense on my plate. It's about $600 a month. So if you are interested in helping support the podcast financially, you can do that for as little as $3 a month over at patreon.com/animals-at-home. There you will have early access to the episodes. You have access to submit questions to upcoming guests, and you also will automatically be added to our Discord server so you can chat with the other listeners of the podcast as well. So if you are a listener of the podcast and you want to show your support that way, that really does go a long way to help me continue to publish this podcast without losing money, of course, which is the goal. And if you aren't interested in supporting financially, of course, that is 100% okay. Just listening to the show is really a lot of support. But what you can do is share the episode with as many people as you can on Facebook and on Instagram. That really does go a long way as well. And thank you so much to CustomReptileHabitats.com for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. If you're looking to help support the podcast and you're also in the market for a new enclosure, you can head to animalsathome.ca/CRH. That URL will take you directly to the Custom Reptile Habitats website. And if you go through that link, that is an affiliate link. So if you do make a purchase, a small commission comes back to me at no extra cost to you. And of course, that helps me keep the lights on in here as well. And I think that is it. Enjoy the episode. Well, Brandon, welcome to the podcast. Thank you very much for doing this.
Thanks for having me on.
I'm excited to chat with you. Obviously, we've stayed in touch for several years at this point. You're another Canadian reptile podcast, and we go back and forth on a bunch of different things. So why don't we start with just your background, how you got into reptile keeping, and I really want to dig into some of those projects you're working on as well. So tell us the origin story here.
So my dad originally got a snake, which we ended up naming Cuddles, which she is a normal boa constrictor. She is now 20 years old. So I got her when I was 10. So I don't consider that time frame of me actually keeping the snake myself, because my dad did most of the work for most of that time. So, it did give me a lot of experience, and I read a lot of books in the meantime on different reptiles. I read The Complete Boa Constrictor, which made me want to get a sunglow boa because it was just so gorgeous in the pictures. And I ended up getting one quite a few years later down the road, which is actually behind me in that enclosure there.
Awesome. Was the original boa that your dad picked up, was that sparked? Did you want the snake? Were you talking about wanting a snake, or was that something that he wanted to get?
We kind of talked about getting a different pet because we just didn't have space for a dog or the time for a dog, as our family was fairly busy. My dad was always gone out of town for work a lot. So his friend was like, "Hey, my son's not taking care of this animal very well. Do you want it?" And then we kind of all talked about it, and we were all really excited. I've always liked snakes and dinosaurs. As a young kid, I read a lot of books on dinosaurs, as most of us probably have. So it was pretty exciting to get a snake when I was that old. So we ended up going on the road trip to Red Deer at the time, and then we picked up the snake, and we kind of came up with the name Cuddles for whatever reason. I can't actually remember the reason, but that's the name that we chose. And she's a very great snake. She's never struck at anybody. She's never bitten anybody. She's a pretty lazy boa constrictor.
So do you still have that snake, or is it with your dad?
No, she's actually at my house right now.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, she's over 8 feet, so she's a pretty large boa, for a normal anyway.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
And her coloration is just fantastic. I think normals get overlooked because of all the different color morphs and stuff. So I don't think there's as much of appreciation for them because they don't have the high price tag because they're not a fancy coloration. Yeah. But they are the same great animal that everybody loves. It's just in a regular jungle pattern.
Yeah.
That I think is overlooked. And in my personal preference, I like animals that have more of a natural coloration than all these kind of morphs. But I do have a couple morphs of boas in my collection, like the Sunglow, and then I have a Central American Motley. And then I have a California king snake, which is a high white. And then everything else in my collection is normals because I keep Madagascar hognose species. I have all three. So there is no morphs in those currently. There is some slight color variations and pattern variations that I have noticed in my experience with keeping them. So I've kept those for probably, about 8 years now. And I started off with wild caughts as there was no captive breds at that time. So I had to establish them, which can be very difficult if you don't know what you're doing. And that was my first pair of wild caughts. Luckily, these are pretty hardy snakes when they're adults, which was a benefit because if I got them really young, with my experience with the hatchlings that I have produced, it's not a fun time. They are hard to establish and they don't feed very well.
So what brought you to that species? Because that is a really unique species. I don't think there are many, maybe you know the answer to this, but there are very few people in Canada that are working with that species. So how did your hobby progress to picking such a niche animal to work with?
I did like the Western hognoses. They did look pretty nice, but they were pretty small, and I kind of like a little bit larger of an animal. It's easier to handle, and they're a little bit more robust. And I just really liked their color pattern. And I liked the fact that there wasn't a whole lot of information out there. So there was a lot more room for me to continuously learn about that species. So with having all three species, I've been reaching out to herpetologists for different information and finding as much information I can find on Google Scholar, looking for different scientific documents on their breeding behaviors, what they eat in the wild. I've talked to Dr. Brian Fry about them being rear-fanged and possibly being venomous, and just finding out all the information that I possibly can when it becomes available, which is kind of strange because the Madagascar giant hognose is one of the most common snakes on Madagascar. And yet there is very little information that I've been able to find on them.
So are the three species, is it three subspecies of the Madagascar?
Three separate species in the same family.
What are they?
So there's the Madagascar giant hognose, there's the speckled hognose, and the blonde hognose.
Okay. And they're all actually separate species, but they do look similar besides like color and pattern and whatnot.
They're all different sizes. So like the giant is like between 4 to 6 feet. The speckled is probably between like 2 to 3 feet. And then the blonde is the speckled is probably a little bit bigger, probably like up towards 2 to 4 feet. And then the blonde is more around like 2 to 3 feet. So they're quite a bit smaller, a lot smaller in diameter and body wise. And all their body structures are quite a bit different from each other too. And the habitat is quite significantly different because the speckled hognose, they come from southwest Madagascar, where it's more arid, dry, and it does not see very much rain at all in my research, because I was looking up what kind of precipitation in the areas that these animals are found in, so I can recreate the humidity levels. They are very dry most of the year compared to the rest of the island. So, and then the giants, they are found almost everywhere on the island. And then the blondes can cross paths in some areas of the island with the giants, but they don't cross paths with the speckleds in the west. That's like about the only areas that they don't cover from my current research.
Did all three species come to you as wild caught? You said you started with wild caught. I know that was with for sure the giants. I'm not sure about the others as well.
Yeah, they're all currently wild caught. I have bought some F1 babies of the speckleds, but unfortunately they did not make it. They just ended up going downhill, which has been my experience with the giants as well. So it could be a diet issue. We're not exactly sure what they eat when they're very young.
Do you have any speculate? Do you assume it's more amphibian or something? Or
it's hard to determine because from like pictures and stuff that come from very dry foresty areas, and sometimes when I look at iNaturalist for what areas that they come from, sometimes they're very close to rivers and sometimes they're very far away from rivers and like rocky outcrops.
And then have you had any successful pairings yet with any of the three species?
I've had 3 successful pairings with the giants, but not very great success with clutches. So I've had some clutches with like 12 babies and 1 baby survived. So they would start out eating pretty well, and then eventually they'd just start declining. So I'm not sure if it was because of temperature for incubation, which I did go pretty low. So I was doing 82 degrees. So, and then it took like 110 days for them to hatch out. So I figured going a little bit lower versus a little bit hotter would be more beneficial. So it gives them longer to fully form. So that was my hope anyway. And that's a couple of my friends have produced them as well. And that's the kind of temperatures that they went with. And they've had pretty good success rates as well.
How many people are working with those species in Canada? There's not very many. I'm not sure if you know the number for maybe the States as well.
For my knowledge in Canada, 5 people currently, and 3 of those people were in Alberta alone.
Okay.
So
it's a small number.
Which I also find is very strange that a lot of people who've had the most success are from Alberta versus Ontario, where everybody breeds everything under the sun.
Well, you never know. It could be, natural climate of, Alberta's a lot drier. Maybe there's something there that, you have some different cues that are setting up breeding behaviors. Who knows?
When I pair mine up, they breed more in the summertime. And then some people from other areas in Alberta, they breed in the fall and they have good success rates. But mine don't seem to breed till the summertime, which is kind of interesting because I've had the same species in very similar climate in the province, because I am in Calgary and those guys were in Medicine Hat, and the other guy was in Calgary too. So the climates are very similar versus if I was in like Edmonton, where it's a lot farther north and the barometric pressures and the temperatures are drastically different.
Was there something that, I'm not sure how your herpetoculture, your personal journey changed over time, but were you breeding other species before you got into working with this species specifically? Or like, was there something that changed in how you thought about the animals you kept, as far as like focusing on something that was more rare?
I notice a lot of people go through a lot of different species. I kind of did that a little bit in the beginning, where I got a bunch of different animals and kind of found what fits me. And then this species just was very intriguing to me because there's not a lot of information. So I like the long-term goal of trying to find out as much information as I can. I just enjoy the long-term goals, and some of the people who want instant gratification from, I bought some adult ball pythons and I bred them later this year. To me, that's not very satisfying because I want to see different behaviors. Because like even my adults, I waited from wild caughts. I waited 3 years before I even bred them because I didn't know how old they were. I wanted to make sure that they were well established.
Did they come in adult size or?
All of them that I've gotten so far came in as adults.
Okay, gotcha.
The herpetologists that I've talked to have never seen hatchlings or subadults in the wild.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Yeah, it is very interesting. I think they might be hiding in low-lying brush. And then when they get large enough, more open to being seen, because there's a lot of, on some snake pages that I'm on in Madagascar, they see giants every day during it's about this time of year, I think it is. And some people are like, yeah, I seen 5 in my yard this year.
Wow.
Yeah, so they see quite a few of them.
And is the rear fang venom significant at all for humans? I'm not sure if Dr. Brian Fry had any info on that.
So he did a study on them, and he compared them more to an indigo. So they have a very strong bite, but the venom does pretty well nothing. So it's very primitive, and the delivery system is very poor. So he said it's not concerning. I did ask him if he had any documentation on it, and he's like, there was really no findings, so I didn't really document anything. So,
but if they have strong jaws, it still hurts to get tagged by them.
Yeah, like hatchlings are terrible. They're so mean. But it's probably because they're like, this thing's trying to eat me.
Exactly. So, were the wild caught ones, the adults, were they pretty cantankerous when you first brought them in, or did they mellow?
Very defensive, okay. And even my wild caughts that I have now are very shy.
Okay,
so
yeah.
They don't. If I walk into my snake room and they'll just eyeball me, and then I get too close and then they just hide instantly. So, and I've had them for like 8 years, and they still just hide.
Well, that's what I find interesting about how you keep your animals. Like, you just became obsessed with this species, and it seems like you found a species that you really enjoyed, and I know you just scoured the internet everywhere looking for information, and you're creating almost like your own science project in your own room, and you're going to, if there's only a few people that are breeding them, you're going to find new information that isn't necessarily out there. I'm sure that part of it excites you as well.
Yeah, finding new information does really excite me, especially when I get sent documents from herpetologists, because I like find people who are part of the articles, and I'm like, hey, do you have any more information? And they're like, yeah, I can. What's your email? I'll send you all these different files. And
yeah, that's what I mean. Like, you're always in contact with these like professionals, and you're like on their mailing list now. You're getting all this like cutting edge information right to your inbox.
yeah, it's really exciting because it's like, oh, this new document that I didn't see before or I wasn't able to access, and I'm able to read this information for my own personal use. And it's fantastic because like there was one document about they found a Madagascar giant female 2 feet below ground level with
Wow.
her eggs. So that is very interesting. There was no documents of the humidity in the ground that I recall anyway. It's been a while since I looked at that. So, but that far below ground is pretty interesting. And they dug their own burrow for that. They didn't use some other animal's burrow,
Wow.
to my understanding, because it was a very compact hole.
Interesting. Well, that's a good lesson for people too, is that most of the time, if you contact researchers, they're happy to share the information or their papers with you. Like, you don't have to go through the paywall. Like, of course you can do that, but a lot of times if you just contact the people who wrote the papers, they are excited that someone else is as excited about the niche that they're focused on.
Exactly. Yeah. And it feels really rewarding to talk with somebody who's been trying to find out more information about the species that you are after too.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys have very similar interests. Herpetologists kind of do have more of a leave it in the wild if you can outlook on things, but they are still happy to give you information.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, why don't we talk a little bit about your community involvement? Because not only are you a keeper and you've been keeping for a long time and you're focusing on, some rare species, but you also do a lot in the community. And I feel like that's really, I'm not sure if that's changed in the last couple of years, but for sure in the last year, it seems like you've taken on a lot. So maybe you could just let everybody know what you're doing right now, and then we'll get into it in more detail.
So I think it's about 5 years ago when I moved to Calgary, I joined the Alberta Reptile and Amphibian Society, which is short form is TERRAs for people that don't know about us. So I joined as a general member, seeing how it was ran, seeing kind of where the direction was going. And there was other people in the presidency role and vice president and treasurer and stuff like that. It's changed a lot since then. So originally, about 2 years later, the secretary had to leave for some medical reasons, and my wife took over. And then later that year at the AGM, I took vice president. So it wasn't this past year, but the year before. And there was quite a few changes that I wanted to see, because I think societies have a beneficial role to the community if they are done correctly, because there's a lot of involvement that we can have within the industry and the community. Because without having us, we have less of a professional looking voice to government organizations, municipalities, the federal government, and so on and so forth. And I think that looks really good if we have a group of people who are organized and doing things to benefit conservation, the community, education, and other stuff. Mm-hmm. So I think that's all very important for us to work on as a whole, because without that kind of stuff, we're going to less likely be taken seriously when there's proposed law changes and stuff like that.
Well, even having just like the executive structure is something so simple, but looks so much more professional. If you're reaching out to a government official or somebody else and you have, president of the Herp Society or secretary, whatever it is, they go, oh, okay, these people are actually organized. They probably have minutes. They probably have, executive meetings that they have to follow up with. And that makes people more comfortable with this.
Yeah, it makes us look better because we are trying to be organized. We're trying to get on their level and do things the right way. And then also with being a registered not-for-profit, which is a lot different than a nonprofit, it also recognizes us with the government, provincially in our case. We are not recognized as a federal nonprofit yet. We might be able to reach that goal eventually, because we need a lot more funding than what we have currently to reach that goal. But it really helps with when we do talk to other organizations. Because recently we talked to Fort Mac municipality, so the rural municipality of Buffalo, because they made some bylaw changes a couple of years ago, and we are looking to amend that because they banned boa day and python a day, and that does not benefit the community because they are legal within our province, because we have provincial legislation that restricts what we can keep. Well, restricts what we can't keep, I should say, because it's a banned list of species.
Right, rather than a positive list.
Yes, which I
So
think
this is
is
just one
actually
community,
beneficial.
like one of the northern communities in Alberta decided that they'd make their own kind of rule,
Yeah,
and they banned all boas and pythons.
and venomous and spiders, all insects and stuff like that. So we don't want people to keep venomous. It's not legal within the province anyway. I don't think it's wise for most people to keep venomous. A lot of people aren't properly trained, don't have the right tools to do what they need to do in case of emergency. Most people don't have anti-venom. It's super expensive, right? So it's hard for the average person to be prepared in case of emergency.
Yeah.
So we talked to them. They were very happy with what we had to present to them because we
How did you approach them? Did you just shoot them an email and just start the conversation that way? Say, hey, we want to look at this?
Yeah, so we sent them a very professional email. Before that, we did do a Facebook campaign letting people know about the bylaw and what it restricts and the repercussions of that, because there are no grandfather clauses in place. So there's nothing to protect the people that had the boas and pythons before. So that does not benefit people. And then on a welfare standpoint, that is negatively impacting a lot of residents because now they're afraid to take their boas, their pythons to the vet because they're worried about the municipality taking them.
Great point.
So that was one of the big concerns for us, is that because the bylaw is under an animal welfare bylaw that does not promote good animal welfare at all.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And how did they respond to it? Were they pretty open to looking at it?
Yes.
Change it?
So the people that we talked to, they weren't part of writing that bylaw. So they didn't have a reason why it was put into place. We did our own research and we thought maybe it was because of the Fort Mac flooding and the fires. So they had a big forest fire. And so what happened there was a lot of people had to evacuate their homes. If they were at work, they had to leave now. They couldn't go home to grab their pets or nothing. So they were rushed out of the city. And so that brought up a lot of other issues as well for the municipality, because they were going from door to door trying to see if people were still there or if there was pets that needed water and so on and so forth. So that also brought up some other issues and safety concerns.
So is that where you think that bylaw came from? Like, did they know where the bylaw come from? Because, you know, if they weren't part of the team that wrote it, is it just something that just sort of exists in their bylaws and they don't know where it came from?
They didn't really have a good reason why they knew it was put in place. Unfortunately, because we kind of did our own research into their meeting minutes, because that's all public information. So we were trying to find the justification on why it was put in place. But it didn't seem that we found any good results. We did find the Mount Royal University study on the fire and the impact that displaced a lot of pets. There was a lot of reptiles that were displaced, but there was also a lot more dogs, cats, and birds that were displaced than reptiles. So it didn't seem justified to ban Boidae, Pythonidae, and all those other species that they wanted to do because of the fire. It didn't make sense because there's a lot more displaced animals than just that.
Plus, if you are allowing them to keep out like colubrids, for example, then people are still keeping snakes, so it doesn't really solve the evacuation problem. So that's a bit strange. So are you guys in the process of having them change that bylaw, or how is that going so far?
So the last meeting we had was a little over a month ago now. And so they've taken our recommendations. They're going to approach council and see if they want to spend money on redoing the bylaw and changing and maybe installing a new program to help mitigate some of these issues that have arisen. So by the sounds of it, my recommendation to them was to make the bylaw refer to the Wildlife Act that we have in place. Because when I talked to the city of Ponoka, they were going to ban all exotics. So they didn't realize that encompassed little Susie's guinea pig, little Tommy's bunny rabbit, and a bunch of other things. So when I brought that up, they're like, oh, well, we were just worried about the tigers because of Tiger King and the orangutans that ripped that lady's face off and the big pythons. I'm like, you don't have to worry about that because Alberta already regulates that with the Wildlife Act. So if you take a little bit more time before you put this bylaw through and look at the Wildlife Act and the regulations that it has in place, you will be able to make a better bylaw instead of just banning stuff that you think needs to be banned because it's already controlled here.
Well, and it's cheaper and inexpensive for them to just reference the Wildlife Act or whatever that was called, because now they don't have to pay a lawyer to rewrite everything. They can just reference something that's already been done.
Yep. And then it also takes a lot of that funding relief off of them too, because then their bylaw officers aren't responsible for enforcing that, because then it's up to Fish and Wildlife to enforce the law. So then it's not, it doesn't cost them as much in the long run.
Do you think that herp societies in general were more functional and more effective like maybe 20 years ago? I feel like before the internet, they were probably more important. People would get together and hang out and talk about things. And I feel like slowly they've dissolved and a lot of communities don't even have them.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of herp societies died out because of the internet, unfortunately, because it's easier to send a message right now to 500 people versus going to a business place and organizing together on a Tuesday night at 7:00 when it just does not work for everybody. We still have issues with trying to get a lot of people to our meetings, and we host our meetings on Zoom now. And that's super easy. You can log on your phone from wherever you want or your computer. And it's very easy to come to. But also, I find, depending on the direction that the society has gone, some people don't believe in what the society is doing anymore. So in the past, our society kind of was just focused on hosting the Expo. And besides benefiting the vendors and the sales of animals, what else were we doing to benefit the community? Not a whole lot at that time. So that's where a lot of people felt like they didn't need to be part of the society and didn't want to, because there was a lack of direction. So I think that's important for anybody who wants to start a society or revamp their current society, is having that focused direction on a few things that you want to work on. So a lot of the stuff that we're kind of working on now is a lot of conservation efforts and educational efforts. So we have a $10,000 grant with the University of Calgary for 5 years for zoology, onychology, biology, and a couple other things that I can't remember the big ology words.
So that money comes from the university to you, and then the society disperses it to somebody that you choose?
Nope.
Or?
So we allocated $7,500, and then they matched $2,500 from the university to create a grant in our name. So somebody who is looking to take a course in that kind of stuff. So one of the people that have taken that course through the university, I can't remember the exact name of the course, was Mike from Alpha Reptile. He was a Calgary local, and he took that course and he benefited from it. So we figured if more people like him are interested in doing it, why not help fund that education?
Yeah, that's what I really want people to hear with this, because there's a lot of herp societies in North America that are fixer-uppers at this point, or non-existent. They've gone under, no one's operating them anymore, or they could just be revamped. So I think what you had mentioned there, the community involvement is just so key, and it's so much more like the Expo, of course, is, that's a piece of revenue for the societies. It's important as well, but the community aspect is what gives the herp societies more professionalism, and then you're bringing in more people that way with, interacting with kids and whatnot. So why don't you tell us a little bit, like, what do you think societies should be doing in the community?
So with our society direction, what I think is beneficial to the community is being an advocate for us. So when laws are being changed, that we have a voice. So there just is usually two of us from our society that goes and talks with municipalities, and we're the voice. So if there's bylaw changes, we can have somebody to talk with and have the community's interest in place. So instead of just banning a bunch of stuff that people think are scary, we can be like, hey, this is the reasons why that is not beneficial, because you're cutting down a whole industry. You're losing income for vets and other businesses that do benefit this, because there's a lot of stakeholders in this industry, from breeders, vets, big businesses that sell pets and all the accessories, and manufacturers that build all the stuff for us that we use, like enclosures, lighting, and all that kind of other stuff. So they all benefit from the community, because without keeping pets, all those industries go away.
Exactly. Do you do any like community work with like education work with kids or anything like that? Is that something that you eventually want to mix in?
Yes. So in the past, we've done lots of school programs. So we've gone to schools and done talks and shown people animals, had hands-on things. At our expo, we were doing Kids Corner so people could have a hands-on experience with reptiles and arachnids. At the expo, he comes quite often. So for a lot of people who are into tarantulas, they'll know this name. Stan Schultz, he wrote the Tarantula Keeper's Guide. So he comes to our expo. We give him a free table because all he's doing is just education and getting people over their fears of tarantulas, which is beneficial because people are learning more about something that they thought was very scary beforehand. Mm-hmm. So that's beneficial. We have done lots of other events. So for Family Day in the past, we've done at the Eau Claire Market here in Calgary, we've done a reptile event where people get to come and learn about reptiles, have hands-on experiences, learn about different snakes and lizards. I bring a lot of signage. Terrace has a lot of signage. We're actually revamping that this year. So we have, we can tell people what we're doing and where our focus is, which I think is beneficial.
Do you think a herp society could grow to a point where it could be a position where people could get paid to do it? Like, you're a president right now. Is that something that would ever be feasible? Could you grow that into a business, still keep it a not-for-profit, but actually pay the people who are running it?
I think it's possible if we gain the support of the rest of the community and do things in the right manner. To pay people, it does cost a lot of money. We all put in a lot of time into the society. I actually counted my hours. It'd probably be astronomical.
You don't want to do that.
No, I'd be kind of afraid to figure out how many hours I put in, because there's some months where we usually have a board meeting a month and then we have a member meeting a month. So that's usually about 4.5, 5 hours right there. And then in the meantime, we're doing group chats on to figure out other things. I'm having meetings with municipalities and other committees because we have a lot of different committees to help spread out the workload. And so we have an Expo committee, we have a promotions committee. We have quite a few other committees that I'm all part of them because I'm the president. So I got to overview everything. So I do a lot of meetings and put in a lot of effort, but it's all beneficial because in the long term, I see the long-term goals and the long-term effect instead of just the initial results.
Yeah,
which goes back to me keeping Madagascar hognose. It's a long-term goal that I am happy to see the results of all this effort.
Can we talk a little bit about what we were talking off air before we started recording? Was a grant that you guys had received to help fund some research? Because I think that's another area that people may not realize. With the professionalism of a society, you could actually help conservation directly and be that middleman. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
So I'll start off with our kind of initial conservation efforts. So there's another group that we are helping fund too, which is a new group of biologists and stuff, and they do the Alberta Amphibian and Reptile Conservancy. Our memberships are $20 and $25. So $5 of that goes to conservation efforts. So the more members we have, the more money we can donate. And then eventually maybe we can do like a matching program on like, hey, we raise this much money, we'll donate X amount of dollars, which benefits conservation. So they do they're based out of Edmonton. So they do a lot of research on frogs and stuff like that in the area because there's not a whole lot of snakes up north, a lot of garter snakes, but nothing a whole lot else. And then in the south, which is this big project that we've been kind of working on with AJM Environmental, which Adam has been part of the society for about 10 years. We've been donating to him for a long time, but this is the largest project that we've been in partnership with. So we were able to secure, I think it was just about $200,000 in funding for a 3-year term on conservation efforts of the prairie rattlesnake because they are currently threatened. So with some of the information that Adam gave me, which was a lot of information, because they've done a lot of monitoring of road fatalities, which is unfortunate, but he's monitoring a big den, a big hibernaculum right now. And he has tagged 1,200 rattlesnakes.
Wow.
In that den, which he's talked with other conservation groups like the Rattlesnake Conservancy down in the States and stuff. And This is potentially the largest rattlesnake den in North America.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting.
And it's potentially one of the largest snake dens in Alberta because there's also 3 other species of snakes in that den.
Sharing the same den?
Yes.
So the prairie rattlesnake, and then is it some non-venomous like garter snakes in there as well?
Garter snakes. What else is there? Some racers. I can't remember the name of all the species that we have in Alberta. It's not very many. We have 7 species of snakes in Alberta. So
yeah,
but that's super cool that we have all these snakes in this one den down in the prairies here in Alberta.
That is very cool. So he's going to take that 1,200 tags and monitor them over the next 3 years and see kind of how they fare, where they're dying, where we're losing them and whatnot.
Yeah, because they're a threatened species. So it's important for him and the government and this other organization to monitor them and see how their population is doing, because they're currently threatened. So that's very close to being endangered. So we don't want that, especially for the only species of rattlesnake that we have in the province.
Right. Have you ever seen one in the wild? I've never seen one.
I have not seen the prairie rattlesnake in the wild yet. I've seen lots of pictures.
Yeah.
Lots of really cool pictures that I can send you for the episode 2 from Adam.
Sure, that'd be awesome.
There's like one picture where it's like 20 rattlesnakes in just this one den. It is wild. It looks so cool.
Yeah, well, and of course, everybody knows it does get extremely cold. So it's amazing that species actually can handle the winter, although I'm sure these dens stay relatively warm.
Yeah, which is also brings me up to, we did a podcast episode with the Royal Tyrrell Museum, and they sent me some shorthorn lizard information. So it was a big YouTube link, and I watched that. It was like an hour long, but it was fantastic. And the shorthorn lizard doesn't even burrow underground. They stay on the frost line on the surface, and they get covered in like 5 feet of snow because they track them, and they're on the ground level with the snow. They're like, what's going on here? And yeah, that was very surprising.
Well, that is insane. So is that I guess almost like a wood frog, although the wood frogs, like, they actually freeze solid, but do the lizards, they don't freeze, but they must freeze if they're right at the snow line.
They must freeze, and some of them don't make it through the winter, unfortunately, but a lot of them do. So they must freeze, like the frogs as well.
That's amazing.
So
well, and so that's just such an important avenue to realize that the society allows that sort of funding to take place, because you have a professional organization, and the donor is comfortable donating to, like, they're not just going to donate to a random guy that says he's going to go out and, even though he's associated with the university, it's good to be able to have that money flow through. And,
yes.
How much information are you going to get from this study? Who knows? It's invaluable.
Yeah, in order to get this funding, he has to create an outline of what he's doing, where the money's going, and then what kind of research results are we expecting. So it should be a really cool study. There's a lot of radio tracking and a lot of hibernaculums that he's watching and stuff like that. And then all the road fatalities. So maybe we can mitigate the road issues at some point. Maybe like do what they do in some other areas, close the road for a certain period of time to reduce road fatalities and stuff like that. So it'll be beneficial for the government to have all this information, so that way we can do a better action plan to save the species.
Yeah. Well, I know in Manitoba with the garter snakes, obviously we have the massive breeding dens as well. And it used to be a massive issue with road fatalities, to the point where it's almost dangerous driving on the road because it becomes so slippery, which is kind of disgusting to think about. But
yeah, it kind of is.
they have fences that they can guide the snakes into culverts that go underneath the roads, and I think the road fatalities are almost zero. So because in Alberta, I feel like they do a good job of keeping wildlife off the roads, right? When I drive to Banff or something, there's always like really nice big fencing. Am I remembering that right?
Yes. So in Banff, because it's a national park, they have invested a ton of money to keep all the animals safe in that area. Recently, I actually found an article that they are installing the first animal bridge outside of a national park here in Alberta.
Oh, cool.
So that is also really cool. So to help save species, it's important. So if this works out in other areas besides the national park, maybe we'll see more of that, so other species can have benefit from it. So not just the larger animals that need it because they're getting hit by cars, like deer and elk and bears and all this kind of other stuff, right?
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the podcast, because you mentioned a couple times, I mentioned at the opening that you also have your own podcast, and you've done some pretty interesting episodes. So maybe you could just tell us what the podcast is and sort of what to expect from it, and then I have a couple questions about it.
Okay. So I co-host Canadian Herpetoculture podcast with my co-host Kiana Fox. And we've been taking a break for like 6 months because she's had some life changes, and I've been so busy with Tara's and dealing with laws and all this kind of other stuff, and getting Tara's into a more focused direction instead of being all over the place. So that's taken a lot of my time. But we recorded an episode that we should be dropping here shortly. So probably before this recording is aired.
Can you talk a little bit about that episode? Because it was, or is that still shrouded in some secrecy?
So that episode deals with federal laws. So that in federal law does not affect us with what we can keep because that's all done on provincial level, but it does affect shipping and how that is handled because there's a lot of laws in regards to that. So they deal with the CITES animals shipping interprovincially and internationally. So they deal with all the people who are importing animals illegally, and they regulate what people can bring in. And then interprovincially, so if you were to sell a retic from Manitoba to Alberta where it's illegal, that is illegal on both parts. So you both would get charged. So we kind of go over that kind of stuff and the different acts that
was
apply.
the guest a federal employee or?
Yes. So it was a federal employee from Environment and Climate Change Canada.
And did they reach out to you to come on the show?
Yes, they actually did. They reached out to us because they wanted to talk about some of the information that people get wrong when they think about federal legislation.
I'm very much looking forward to listening to that because I remember when you first started talking about this potential of an episode, everyone was kind of worried because we're like, is this, animal rights activists sometimes kind of sneak in under these different titles and whatnot. We were thinking like, is this going to be like some sort of setup and who knows what it's going to be? But it was legitimately a federal employee that wanted to share information. Yeah.
So I researched this person before I decided to go with the episode and find out their position and talk with them more. And we had numerous chats. This episode was like probably 8 months before we actually recorded.
Right. So are they a reptile keeper themselves or how did they get involved?
They were a police officer for quite a few years. I think he was like 20 years before he got involved in this department. So
interesting.
It's very really interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
But they do appreciate our standpoints, and that department also does work with societies and CanHerp and other organizations in that professional manner as well, because our opinions do matter. Mm-hmm. And we want to do the right thing for the community.
Well, so they do too, right? Like they want that as well. And that's why it's so important that we do have these professional voices to interact with these entities, or else we just get railroaded. And, there's many different examples of that. And if there's no society to go up for bat for us, and it just, it's not going to work. And we had talked about a couple of days ago too, but we have a pretty potent federal act, I think, that's being read right now. That's, something, maybe we could talk a little bit about that. So
it's the Jane Goodall Act. I can't remember the exact number of it. It's like 217. I can't remember, but yes. So originally that act has seen a couple of amendments. So it's been through the first reading, and it's not in Parliament yet. So there's 2 stages for it. So it's got to be read through what they're doing first, which I can't remember exactly what that is. Politics is very confusing. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of channels to go through. Municipal politics that I've been dealing with is its own nightmare, not let alone federal politics.
Exactly, yeah.
So they got to go through 3 readings. So the Jane Goodall Act, I think, was introduced into the United States first. And then it's kind of to protect elephants, orangutans, and all the big stuff that kind of gets funneled through the black market. And they're trying to shut down roadside zoos. So Joe Exotic and all those other people that are doing not so great things for animal care in the States, which I don't find is a prevalent issue, at least here in Western Canada, because we have a lot of government regulation by the province. So it's a lot harder for people to have a roadside zoo here. There is one unregistered zoo, which is the Discovery Wildlife Park, but they also are in partner with the Calgary Zoo, which is an accredited zoo. So they're kind of under that umbrella. So they're being watched by a regulated body.
Right.
So there's some stuff on that list that is questionable to us because after the amendment, the way that it's worded, you can't transport animals interprovincially or internationally. So, and some of the stuff that's of question on there for us is a lot of the boas. There's a lot of pythons on there as well. Most of it is large snakes, and there's also Gila monsters on there, and all venomous reptiles. So, which also brings me up to a question of what is their definition of venomous reptiles? Is it the ones that cause bodily harm and you have to go to the hospital? So like king cobras, gaboon vipers, and all that kind of other stuff. Or would it also affect me with my hognose collection because they are technically rear-fanged venomous?
Exactly. Well, and the boas on that list, it's like every boa species, it's
not every boa species. They're BEI, boa interpreter, is not on there. BCC is, BCO, boa. So the Argentine boas, boa constrictor. So the true red tails. There's a couple species of boa on there that I have never heard of in my life.
Yeah,
and
same.
A lot of the other boa breeders and people that deal with a lot of boas, they're like, I have never seen this in Canada.
Like that Mexican boa, I'd never seen that as a subspecies before. I forget exactly what it's like, boa constrictor Mexicano or something like that. I'm like, I've never heard of that
stuff on there. And some other species. I'd have to open up the list to exactly look at it, which actually I can do that now. It's actually easy to find. If people want to Google search it, just look up the Jane Goodall Act.
And it's the same act on both sides of the border, both Canada and US, the same species, or?
I believe so.
Okay, yeah.
Because, it goes to their website and then it goes to the bill. And there's
section
a lot
3,
of,
I know, is the reptile list. There's
crocodiles on there and caimans as well. So that can affect a lot of people in Ontario who keep those animals. But it's, again, going back to like the large constrictors and some of that stuff, which in Alberta, I agree, it's kind of hard for the average person to keep these animals in a good amount of space for proper welfare.
Yes, no, I completely agree. Yeah. But right now, like you can legally keep a boa imperator in Alberta, right?
Yes, we can keep all boas currently.
Okay. Oh, okay. All boas. Okay.
Yeah. So under serpents, they have the Papuan python, red tail boa, Mexican boa, so boa constrictor mexicana, boa constrictor nebulosa, so the Dominican boa, which is also not commonly kept in captivity. Which is different than the Dominican red mountain boa. So some people are concerned about that. The Argentine boa, which are CITES 1. So a friend of mine actually has them, and they yearly have to keep their documentation of that species, how many
it's already
produced. Done. Yeah, it's already under control.
Yeah.
So this makes no sense to me because they're already regulated. The Orton's boa, boa constrictor ortoni, I've never even heard of that boa.
Yeah. Maybe
Bolivian,
there's some boa experts out there that will know those species, but when I looked at that list, I was like, I don't know if these are really outdated, old subspecies names that are now umbrella under just boa constrictor or what's going on. But
there's a lot of stuff on here that doesn't make sense. And then there's anacondas, so the Bolivian anaconda and Beni anaconda. So Anectis beniensis. I'm probably butchering a lot of these names. The green anaconda, yellow anaconda, olive python, reticulated python, Owen Pelly python, Burmese, the Indian python, African rocks, Amethystian. I think I'm butchering that too, and Australian or Australian scrub pythons.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of the larger snakes, but a lot of the boas doesn't make sense to me. A lot of this other stuff is kind of already regulated under Alberta legislation, so that we can't have a lot of this stuff. I think we can have olive pythons here in Alberta, so which they get large, but it's actually pretty handleable. Same with like boa constrictor.
Yeah, exactly.
They're pretty handleable. I know plenty of people with Argentine boas. They get very thick body, but they're not super long, so they're pretty manageable for 1 to 2 people. When it becomes more dangerous you need a mandatory of 2 people to handle that, I have kind of an issue with the average person caring for them. Unless there was some sort of permit system in place where it's like states, you need X amount of space, you need X amount of people to care for this animal, and if you meet these requirements, that's fine. But with that, because our population is so small here in Alberta and a lot of other places in Canada, I don't see a permit system happening anytime soon, just because of the funding for that is going to be really hard. And then the cost of making that program is going to be very expensive, and to regulate it and hire people to manage all that stuff. So,
well, it's the same thing as with the venomous too. Like, it's most people shouldn't have venomous. If people are keeping venomous, there should be some sort of permit system or some sort of education system. But that's so much work to do to actually establish something like that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you just ban it completely, it's a little bit scary, because you think, okay, is it going to be difficult to get those animals in to do research, for example, in a university? Like, is that going to be now like a nightmare for a university to get to import an animal? And so it's tricky.
Well, under these acts as well, if you read through a lot of the wording and restrictions and stuff, they have a list of regulatory bodies that are allowed to keep these animals. So the Calgary Zoo, a bunch of other places, University of Calgary and stuff like that. So already recognized facilities. So
that helps a bit.
Yes, it does, but it doesn't benefit the people that already have these animals in captivity. And I have to look deeper into the law to make sure if there's a grandfather clause and how that affects people, because a lot of grandfather clauses like this, it's like you can keep the animal until it dies, and that's it. And you can't breed it or sell it or give it away or anything. So
it's at your home until you either euthanize it or it dies.
Yeah. So that's something that we're going to have to look into. It hasn't reached Parliament yet. So the society is going to be working on writing up a letter, and we're going to make it so you can be like, whatever your name is. And then we're going to have the rest of the letter and then a place for you to sign off and send it to your MLA. Because something that we noticed is a lot of people have a hard time reaching out to government bodies, MLAs, and all these other people in a professional manner. So we're going to make it plug and play, write a nice letter, work with CanHerp on that, make sure we're all on the same page. And then everybody that sends this letter in is going to have the same exact voice.
Yeah.
And that makes us look more unified and more professional.
It's the same thing they did. CanHerp put that together for Winnipeg when the Winnipeg was going through those bylaw changes, and I think those were pushed back, or maybe, I don't know if they were defeated yet, but
it was pushed back. They're not going to go through with the bylaws currently.
Okay, yeah,
it was voted 3-1.
So they did a great job of having that go out to everybody. It was super easy. You just go to a website, you type in your name. I think you clicked a couple buttons, but you didn't have to write anything, and then it just automatically was sent out to the MLA and. Yeah. And then, I know I even got a response from the MLA at some point later saying, thank you. And, we're looking at this. And so, that they were actually getting to where they need to be. And it's like you said, you're not asking the community to sit down and type out something. It's already done for them. And and it was effective, because the bylaws that they tried to bring in were really wild. And,
it was wild.
But if we weren't there to stand up for it, it would have gone through.
Yeah, exactly. And that bylaw was also kind of pushed in by are not so friendly people from WAP, World Animal Protection, and ZooCheck. So, and also ZooCheck is decimating Ontario right now with a bunch of other bylaws in Oshawa and other places as well. So CanHerp has their hands full with that kind of stuff.
Did you ever talk to that federal employee about how because I'm guessing the government will perpetually be approached by animal rights organizations, and they can be so persuasive as well. But I was wondering, from a federal employee point of view, do they look at those people with like super credibility, or do they always kind of take them with a grain of salt? Or did you even ask that?
I did ask that, and he couldn't really give me an answer, because he's just there to enforce the laws.
Right.
So that's their department, and that's what they do.
So he gets the sheet. This is the laws that you have to enforce today. He has nothing to do with how it happens.
Yeah, so he's not responsible for how it happens. So it's our duty to talk to the politicians and all these other people. So starting with the MLAs, because the MLAs can talk on our behalf.
Yeah.
And because they want to be voted in again. So if they benefit a bunch of people who are talking about this subject matter, they'll want to work with us on it if possible.
Exactly. One other thing that you do with the society that you've just started to do that I really want to talk about is the emergency action plans. So can you tell us about that? Because this is something that we need in the community, in the hobby, and we don't really have.
Yes. So recently, there's been a lot of fires within businesses and homes with people with reptiles and stuff like that. And then also on social media, I see a lot of people of the power went out what should I do? Or whatever the situation may be. Power outages because of a big snowstorm, which affects a lot of people here in Canada. Floods like Fort Mac had, big forest fires and stuff like that. So this actually kind of developed from the municipality chat that we had, because their lawyer was concerned about what people can do in these cases of emergency. So like, how can they be more prepared? So it's less of a responsibility on the municipality because people are being more responsible for their pets and all these incidents that are happening. So we are working, on numerous action plans for people to hopefully be a little bit more prepared in these cases. Fire is kind of the worst case scenario. So it's hard to rate for something for that. So
like as a fire, does that mean your house is on fire, or there's a wildfire outside your town that could consume, or both, basically?
We're going to be working on both because large scale events do affect people in their homes.
Sure.
So we're actually working with the Calgary Emergency Management Association with this, because I reached out to them first because we want to get professional opinions from other people in the industry for emergencies, fires, and all this kind of other stuff. So we're reaching out to firefighters and those people, electricians, because that's a big issue too, is people overloading their circuits because their home was built in the 60s and they don't know the power rating, or if their circuit breaker is wore out and it might not trip because it's wore out. And then that causes excessive heat on the power cord, and then it could potentially start a fire because they overloaded their circuit. And sometimes the fail safes fail, unfortunately. So it's not going to be 100% foolproof because stuff does go wrong. Sometimes wiring isn't correct from the manufacturer. I know a lot of people have issues with heat tape that's manufactured, and I've had it burn through the bottom of a PVC enclosure with the animal inside. I'm lucky the animal was on the other side of the enclosure and it didn't get injured. And that's very scary. So I think us creating these plans to help people be more prepared for a different type of emergency makes the community more responsible, gives us a better image to the province, to the municipalities, and to federal governments that we're trying to be more proactive in these situations.
So basically, it will be just a package of different emergencies, and then you have a pamphlet that you can go through and give you something. What will you do with that? Will you open that up to people who aren't in Terrace, people who are outside of Alberta, or will that?
Yes.
Because it's kind of a lot of work on your part to just give it to everybody for free.
Yes. So we are thinking probably just at Expos that we'll just have an emergency kit. So with like a bunch of heat packs, because we talk to vets, our exotic vets that are part of the society as well, and see what they have to input for emergency kits and some information. So we might be selling kits and stuff like that, but all of our information is probably going to be free on a PDF to download.
Okay.
It is a lot of work, but the benefit for the community is more valuable to me than getting paid for the work.
Well, then other societies can have it. And also, these are our emergency action plans. Maybe they have to tweak it for their area or make a different one for flooding or whatever it is. But then every society has access to these, and we can show, these are how we're being proactive. So maybe we could just I don't know if you have any of these off the top of your head, but what are some things that are involved in these emergency action plans? Like, let's just talk about a fire. What do people do? So,
within like a home fire, you can have an ABC fire extinguisher, which depending on your situation might be ideal. So talk to your local fire department to make sure what extinguisher they recommend, because that can be a liable issue. So that's also something we have to be careful about, because we aren't professionals in that industry, so we can't make exact recommendations. Right. But once we get the support from the Emergency Association here in Calgary, we might be able to do that because it's endorsed by somebody who is a professional in that industry and helps regulate that. So having a smoke alarm in your reptile room that can alert you before a fire breaks out. So if it's something smoldering like electrical, your fire alarm will go off, and then having an extinguisher in there will help mitigate that issue. And then you're going to have smoke inhalation for your animals. So you want to take them to the vet as soon as possible, just to make sure that they're doing good. Yeah. There's not a whole lot that vets can do, but they can just make sure the overall health is good. So if they get too much smoke, that they might need to do whatever they need to do at the clinic to make sure that animal has a successful recovery from that incident.
Mm. And what about power outages? Because that's a big one. Of course, many people lost animals last year in Texas with the pretty long power outage. Mm. And it seems kind of, you think, because there was a threat of maybe the power going out here a couple of days ago because we had this massive blizzard, and I was thinking, like, if the power goes out, I probably have a couple of days at least before things get too cold. So typically, I don't think I've ever seen the power go out for longer than that. But, you know, you have to prep for it. If you lose power for a couple of days, it can get cold in your home really quickly.
So for like here in Canada, if you can, I recommend getting a generator, because if it's minus 30, your home's going to cool down fast, especially in the wintertime. So that might be ideal. And then also in the summertime, some places get really hot. And if you don't have AC or the power goes out, because we have power strains here in the summertime because everybody's running their AC, so that can cause power outages too. Then you can overheat your animals, which is almost as bad as having them too cold, because having them too cold for a period of time is somewhat okay, depending on the temperature. Talk to your vet about that. And yeah, it's just being prepared. And then also, if you can't afford a generator, buy bulk order a pack of heat packs for like 72-hour heat packs, and then have snake bags or something that you can just toss your animals in, and then a styrofoam cooler. So that way you can retain as much heat as possible if you need to. Or if you have the generator, you can put a space heater in your snake room to keep the ambient temperature. And there's multiple ways to go about it, but just find what way is going to be the easiest for you to maintain in that time frame. Because if you're out of power for like 3 days, that's a long time to be without power for your animals.
Yeah, I was going to say, what you don't want to do is look for heat packs and how to buy them when your power is already out. Like, all this stuff needs to be done beforehand, and then it becomes very simple. It's like, okay, implement this plan. If the power is going to be out for more than 12 hours today, then we're moving the snakes to these coolers or, you know, styrofoam bins with the warming packs, and we'll be okay.
Exactly. And then also for like large scale events, like large fires, forest fires, and flooding and stuff like that, maybe have a contingency plan to have your animals move to a different city temporarily, to your parents' place, or somebody who's like, hey, yeah, you can keep your animals here in case of emergency for X amount of time. So that way, if there's a large scale event, that you have a backup plan in case you can't have your animals in your home.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about right now, because we just got dumped on with all the snow. The river here, like, I live in a floodplain. Manitoba is a floodplain, South Manitoba, and so the river is already insanely high, and then we got, 1.5 feet of snow in the middle of April, which is just really unusual. So luckily the town I live in is diked, so we do have this, wall of dirt that surrounds us that's supposed to protect us from a flood, but that could breach. And I'm thinking, like, everything needs to leave the basement as soon as possible. You have to, you're going to have to leave the enclosures. They're going to get damaged, but the most important thing is hopefully get the electronics out, but of course get the animals out.
Yeah. And we've had similar cases here in Calgary, like I think it was the 2013 flood here in Calgary, and they've done a lot of flood mitigation since then for that, because of all the extra snow that was in the mountains, and then it runs off here and then it floods the whole city. Mm-hmm. So that's something that we have to be aware of here. Luckily, I live on top of a hill, so unless it's going to be like 30 feet of water, I don't really have to worry about it. If
you flood, then we're all done anyway.
Yeah. But it's issues that people have to think about. And I find the reptile community does not think about these issues ahead of time until they come up. So it's just about being proactive and figuring out how we can ease the stress off of people. And then also another one that we are going to kind of work on is just a document for what are you going to do with your pets if you pass away. So some people have tortoises or birds or whatever that might outlive us. So those pets will be passed down to whoever you deem that to. Or in a sudden death, some sort of accident or whatever, where are your animals going to go? Because it's going to be a lot of stress on your significant other to deal with, instead of figuring out how much are these animals worth because you told them it was $50 and it's actually $1,000 snake because you didn't want to tell your wife how much it cost.
Yeah. Yeah. That could happen. That's why you got to be honest with how much you've spent.
Yes, exactly.
But no, that's a really good point too. And I think other than maybe fish, fish keepers would be able to rival reptile keepers with the volume of animals that people keep. If you have a dog or a cat, it's, people might have 3 or 4 dogs, maybe a couple of cats. And if you're needing someone to deal with those animals, either in a death or an emergency situation, it's pretty quick. Call the dog, it jumps into the car. But reptiles, it's not simple. Like, you're going to have to ask someone to go into an enclosure, pull out an animal that they're almost certainly going to be afraid of, and then there's 30 of them.
Yeah, or exactly. More. So it can be very difficult. And so it's just about being prepared for different scenarios and having people with the right information. So it's going to take a long time before these programs are all out. So we'll probably release them as we get finished each one. So there'll be probably a dozen documents at this point with all the different things that I keep thinking of. Mm-hmm. But it's all important information for people to be aware of.
Absolutely.
Because it's a lot of stuff that we don't think about.
Yeah, and it's the stuff we don't want to think about. That's why we probably have not done it in the past. Nobody wants to think about these emergencies, but it's better to have the work done beforehand. So yeah, no, that's fantastic. Is there anything else that we didn't cover today that you wanted to mention before we wrap up?
I think that's a lot of information for people to take in.
It is,
but if people have more questions about our society or want us to help them with forming a society, they can reach us at albertareptiles@gmail.com. They can check out our website as well, which is albertareptiles.ca, and check out Tara's. And if you want to become a member, there's links to that on our website, and you can email us as well. And come check out the Expo in May 28th and 29th at the Absolute Baseball Academy in Calgary. So we put on the Calgary Reptile Expo twice a year. All entries from the Expo helps fund our programs that we do. So all this safety programming. We're also handing out stickers. So we might be able to send you some of those too.
Cool.
Emergency stickers for people's doors. So they're a little bit more encompassing than the regular stickers, which is just dogs and cats, and then has a section for others. So ours has reptiles at the top, and then it has fish and amphibians.
And birds. These are these stickers that you put on like the front of your door to basically, when first responders come, if there's a fire or something, they can just look at the door. They go, okay, there's 2 dogs circled and like 5 snakes or whatever. So they know immediately what the house has and what they have to do.
So it helps in emergency situations. So if you're not home, you can put your phone number on there, so they have somebody to contact instead of, we don't know how to get a hold of this person because our house is burning down.
Yeah.
It just makes it a little bit faster for emergency services to get a hold of you instead of going through the city. Like, hey, do you have a up-to-date phone number for this person so we can contact them, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Just makes it a little bit easier. It's not going to be for everybody because maybe somebody doesn't want to put on there that they have 40 snakes in their house.
Yeah.
But it's up to the user discretion. And also we're trying to encompass everybody who keeps lower amount of reptiles, because those outweigh the majority of us that keep numerous amount of reptiles.
Exactly.
So I'm trying to get them involved in the community and the society and be aware of us. They don't have to get involved with the society if they don't want to, but if they want to get a membership, that's beneficial to us. And they might not know about these laws. So if they hear about us at their vet clinic because we're giving out these stickers at a vet, they'd be like, oh, hey, what's this about? And it gives them more information to get involved with us potentially.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And that's what I really hope people get from this conversation is there's, as I said earlier, there's definitely societies within the continent and in Europe too, I'm sure, that need help and need some, to be renewed and restarted again and restructured. And you've sort of highlighted how beneficial and positive those can be in the community. So if anyone does need some help doing that, I know that you're already super busy, but I'm sure you're always willing to help out other people, get things off the ground. And if for anybody that is in the Calgary area, definitely go check out that expo. I'm thinking I might try, I can't go to the one in May, but there's the one in Red Deer that I know you guys don't put on, but the Western
Canadian Reptile Expo.
Yeah.
The WCRE, yeah.
Yeah, I may try to make my way out to there in August. We'll see.
I'll be there.
If you're there.
Vending is the Terras I think we're going to get 2 tables.
Okay.
Because this year we invested in ourselves and got a lot of new banners. So we got 6 pull-up banners, a bunch of different information about what we do. And we got an 8-foot by 8-foot curved banner.
Oh, awesome.
So it's going to have kind of what our mission is, our logo, some of the stuff that we do, and some organizations that we are in partners with.
Cool. Well, if I'm there, obviously I'll come visit your table. And can you let everybody else know where they can find you on social media or any more about the podcast as well?
They can find our podcast, Canadian Herpetoculture Podcast. If you just Google that, it pretty well pops up everywhere. But on Facebook, you can look up chp.podcast, and same on Instagram. You can find my inactive Instagram page for my breeding that I kind of just, it's not a big focus of mine. I'd rather do the society stuff because I see more benefit from that than producing animals. So that's Ectotherm Creations. I haven't posted on there in like 8 months.
I don't even know if I follow you on there. I'll go follow you on there, but I'll make sure that that's in the show notes, as well as all the links to the podcast and whatnot.
And then, and then Alberta Reptiles. So I'm on the page for members and stuff like that. So you can find me as president and all that information there. Check out the society if you can. Come to our meetings if you're in Alberta, because we're the Alberta Reptile Amphibian Society. That's why we do Zoom meetings now, because I'm trying to encompass everybody that lives within the province.
Yeah.
Before it was in-person meetings, which was kind of hard for anybody that didn't live in Calgary to come to meetings. So that just made us, in my opinion, the Calgary Reptile Society, not the Alberta Reptile Society. So if you can, come to Zoom meetings, check us out. And then if you want, you can get a membership from there.
Cool. Well, I love what you're doing. I can't wait to see how this progresses. And like I said, I think this is a really important conversation to have. So thank you so much for joining me on the podcast, Brandon. This was great.
Thanks for having me on and talking about societies and their importance. I hope a lot of people get a lot of information from this and can develop their own thoughts on societies and join one if they want in their area and see where it goes.
Yeah, I'm sure you've motivated some people. So that was great.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, that is the end of that episode. Brandon, thank you so much for stopping by and joining me on an episode. And thank you so much for laying out how your society works and giving us some ideas for how we can start firing these up into other locations. And I do think healthy herp societies will be a huge key to the health and overall well-being of herpetoculture in the future. And it would be nice to see these things start to fire up on a more substantial level. Like I said through the intro, I think herp societies were a lot more common in the past, and we talked about this in the episode as well. And I think it's time to bring them back. So if you are looking for a great project in your community, if there isn't a herp society, this is a good way to go about it. And I think Brandon would be a great resource for you if you're looking for more information on how to do that. Listeners, if you enjoyed the episode, the best thing and the easiest thing you can do is just share it. Share it on social media, Facebook or Instagram. That really does help get other listeners on the show, which is great. If you're looking for more information for the podcast, make sure you head to animalsathomenetwork.com. The show notes for every episode are published there. If you would like to help support the podcast financially, you can do that for as little as $3 a month over at patreon.com/animalsathome. If you just head there, you'll be able to see the different perks that you get with the different tiers, but everybody will have access to the Discord server so you can chat with myself and other keepers that listen to the podcast as well. And finally, thank you so much to customreptilehabitats.com for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. You can find affiliate links in both the YouTube description or the show notes, or just head to animalsathome.ca/CRH. That will take you directly to Custom Reptile Habitat's website, and that will be the affiliate link that you can use to automatically give me some commission based off of your purchase. You don't have to do anything else other than go to that link and make your purchase as you normally would. And that is it. As I said in the intro, we're getting back to regular episodes. It's not going to be every 7 days. I think I'm going to aim for every 10 days for now. So 3 episodes a month. And then we're trying to get back to that 4 episodes a month, hopefully in the next month or 2, or maybe even less. With the editor, it really does help a lot. So anyway, thank you guys so much for listening, and I will catch you next episode.